About Panama is a destination to hide money anymore. What we're talking about is Panama is a destination to legally set up a business, to legally bank, to legally establish a fiscal domicile with full recognition and disclosure to your home country. The big surprises about Panama is what a good place it is to do business. So the country really offers solid business structures that are reasonable to set up, offer good privacy, good legal liability protection, relatively fast and simple to set up. Panama recently joined as an associate member of the MERCOSUR. So although that hasn't been implemented yet, I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity. And we had a client from Canada who set up a Panamanian foundation, and he basically has businesses, properties scattered all over the world. He take you through to a few appointments during that time. Your company's already been formed. You'll leave after those 3-4 days as a temporary resident with a temporary cedula that's valid for 6 months. That Panama is probably the best destination in Latin America, perhaps the Americas, for banking.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for being in this episode with the Jerz Way Inc. As you know, my name is Gaby, and today we're going to be speaking about Panama and why it's the best alternative for you who is listening in 2025 or in the future, the best strategy for you. Hi, Jerz.
Hi, welcome back. Thanks for joining us, everybody. And last time we spoke about Paraguay, and I would say of all the countries we operate in, we do the most of these residencies in Paraguay and in Panama. So this is a great alternative to Paraguay, and I want to tell you more about the product and why it's really a residency you should consider.
In this podcast, we're going to be speaking about how we're going to be leaving the system and choosing Panama. And one of the first questions I want to ask about this, Jerz, is what are the misconceptions that people have when they're planning to leave a tax residency or their home country?
I think the biggest misconception that people have is how complicated the process is going to be. A lot of people overthink it, and they use that thinking process as an excuse to never take action. So I can't tell you how many clients I've heard from that have thought about it. They've researched it for many, many years. And when they do finally take action, they come back to me and they say, hey, you know what? I should have done this years ago. So I think the biggest misconception, yes, of course, there has to be planning. Yes, thought has to be put into the process. But the biggest misconception is that you have to overcomplicate it. And you really don't. There's almost in every case a simple path that you can take to leave your tax residency and pay less tax.
And how does Panama make it easier to disconnect from the tax system like Canada, US, and France?
Well, the U.S. is another animal. For those looking to leave the tax system, everything we talk about is a lot more complicated because it isn't as simple as these other countries, Canada, France, Australia, pretty much any of the European countries. Panama makes the process pretty easy. Similar to Paraguay, you can get a full residency setup that becomes a tax residency with no investment, and you have to spend some time in the country. It's not as advantageous as Paraguay, where there was no physical presence requirement, but it's a minimal physical presence requirement compared to other countries like Dubai, other popular tax residency options. So that's how Panama makes it easy.
Well, most of people always think, and that's why we're doing this podcast, that leaving the system means to do it illegally, which is something we reassure people that leaving a place that doesn't benefit you doesn't mean that you are risking your life or risking your government structure. But how can they start doing it with Panama? Why is the easier point right now in Latin America?
Well, I think you touched on an important point, which is the notion of doing something legally as opposed to doing something illegally. if you're doing this illegally, you're committing tax evasion, fraud, various different things. The consequences of those things are not good. So we never recommend people to commit tax fraud, to not pay the taxes that they owe, that they have to pay. What we help people do is create setups where they can legally leave their country and establish a fiscal domicile or tax residency in another country. And by doing so, they legally, that's the important designation. Everything we're talking about is legal. They legally can pay less or even no tax. And Panama makes it very easy because, like Paraguay, Panama is a territorial tax country. So just real briefly to explain, if you didn't catch our previous episodes, a territorial tax country means they only tax income derived from within that country. So if you work for a Panamanian company, you open a restaurant, a physical business in Panama, you're going to have to pay some small tax. It's going to be a lot less, but you're going to have to pay something. Whereas income derived from a foreign employer, from a US LLC, something like that, is not taxed. You pay zero tax on it.
Back in 2008, Panama was on the news in all over the languages. I still remember in Venezuela, there were scandals, in Colombia, in the Portuguese language, in the French community. Many people from the European cultures, they think about Panama like this scary place that nobody's speaking about. But you're speaking in 2025 that is the best strategy to keep the secret of their tax residency as the safest place. But what happened with these people that got traumatized by all those news and all those scandals? What's make it different from 2008 and nowadays? Why is now considered like the safest place to start doing business and banking?
So what happened, I originally moved to Panama in 2008. So when I left the United States, Panama was the first country I lived in. And this is just right at the beginning when it became a popular destination for expats, for tax residencies, for that sort of thing. So over these 17 years, I've seen this sort of change in Panama. Back then, and then in the years that followed, Panama was all about keeping secrets. So if you were somebody who was a French citizen living in France, it was very popular to set up structures and keep money in Panama. But that was tax fraud. So by still living in the high tax country, what you were doing was technically not something that was allowed. And so there were some scandals a few years later in the 2010s, the Panama Papers, everybody remembers. And after that happened, Panama was actually blacklisted by the EU and by many countries around the world, meaning it didn't matter if you left your domicile in France and Canada and another country, they weren't going to recognize it because Panama was a blacklisted country. So if you kept money there, if you had a business there, anything, it wasn't good and it wasn't recognized by a lot of countries because of this fraud that occurred. So over the last few years, Panama has really worked hard to clean up their image. And what exists today is vastly different. We're not talking about Panama as a destination to hide money anymore. What we're talking about is Panama is a destination to legally set up a business, to legally bank, to legally establish a fiscal domicile with full recognition and disclosure to your home country.
That's exactly what I wanted to hear. And also, I think your audience wanted to know, because there's a lot of people speaking about Panama, a lot of people, but they don't know exactly what's going on 10 years ago or nowadays. And it's good to inform upfront about the new structure they are able to do legally and having the right structure for them. Now, I have a question for you, Jerz. Speaking about that, what are the best three options that they have when they choose Panama over Dubai, over Cyprus or Malta? Because we are reading a lot of news about all the parts of the world that are collapsing. That's not a secret.
So Panama offers quite a few benefits, I would say. One of the biggest is the location and the accessibility. So Panama has a very well-established international airport with direct flights, direct connections to most of the major cities, certainly in the Americas, but around the world too. And that makes it very attractive for somebody who actually wants to do business, banking, and plans to spend time in the country. I think for a lot of people, that gives it the edge as a place they actually want to spend time over Paraguay is the accessibility. Really good flight connections. Panama is also, because it's been in this space a lot longer than, say, Paraguay, it's much more developed. So it has much a greater first world infrastructure. It has a much more established expat foreigner community, much more of a cosmopolitan city, Panama City versus, say, Asuncion in Paraguay. And also just the natural beauty. Again, comparing it to Paraguay, Paraguay has natural beauty, but it's a landlocked country. Panama is sort of blessed as this Central American sliver where you have these beautiful mountains, breathtaking beaches on both sides. So you have the Atlantic coast, you have the Pacific coast, you have a series of islands that are literally minutes from Panama City that offer some of the best beaches and islands to visit and snorkel and boating that you'll find anywhere in the world. And that makes it very attractive because it's not only a place you can set up your fiscal life, your fiscal residency, it's a place you may want to spend some time and actually live or have a base.
I love that you always mention the nature. I think for people that are listening to us, nature is the top priority for more of expats, and it's good to mention that.
For sure, you have the nature, but you also have the city. So you have Panama City, right outside of Panama City. I remember it being it's been years since I've been, but maybe an hour and a half outside of Panama City, you have beautiful mountains with waterfalls, hiking, stuff like that. And then literally like an hour and a half on both sides, you have the two coasts, the coastline. So Panama really is blessed to have a lot of nature.
I love that. And in this segment that we're speaking about this strategic base, what people don't know about Panama that might surprise them?
Well, I think one of the big surprises about Panama is what a good place it is to do business. So because they've been doing this for a while, they have a lot of very attractive structures for businesses. It's very well known. I wouldn't say it's a surprise that Panama is probably the best destination in Latin America, perhaps the Americas, for banking. But the business is more of a surprise to people, I think, that the country really offers solid business structures that are reasonable to set up, offer good privacy, good legal liability protection, relatively fast and simple to set up. Compared to, say, like Caribbean countries and a lot of the other countries in Latin America, it's much more efficient to establish a business. And also the foundation, which I know we'll talk about later in this episode, which is really a structure most people have never heard of or know very little about. But in most cases, it's a better product structure for high net worth individuals than the trusts that you hear so much about. The Nevis Trust, the St. Cook's Trust, the Panama Foundation might beat them all.
And may I suggest also 2 points that people don't know? Probably, I don't know, but it could be important. What do you think?
Absolutely.
Well, one of the things I didn't know, and I'm also in the Latin American continent, is that Panama doesn't have a central bank, meaning that the currency that is attached to the US dollar they don't have a central bank that actually inflates the price inside of the country. So the inflation there is not a concept that they do know by heart, because they don't have a system that actually makes the inflation or printing money like any other parts of the world. And the second thing that I was really surprised by that is what you're mentioning about business, but everything arrived in Panama. Meaning that everything that we receive in Latin America always stops in Panama. Meaning that if you want to open a business in Panama, you can set it up the foundation there or the business structure and send it legally to any other countries in Latin America.
And also an interesting point on that, Panama recently joined as an associate member the MERCOSUR. So although that hasn't been implemented yet, I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity. Panama already has well-established free trade zones. The Panama Canal, you can import products for very low or even no duty, depending on what the product is. And now with MERCOSUR, you're going to have the potential to export those products from Panama to all of or most of Latin America at very reduced rates. So I think that it isn't fully implemented yet, but it's something that will be very, very positive for Panama in the coming years and provides great opportunity for investors.
And I also wanted to ask you this question. What are the real cases scenarios from your clients that are doing business with you? Can you tell us a little bit more about Panama and the clients that are now setting up their foundations, their businesses in Panama?
Yes. So we'll touch a little bit on the foundation, I think. A lot of high net worth individuals consider the trust structure because a trust is a great way to manage your assets. You can put a business inside a trust and it provides protection. It's going to shield you from liability, from ex-wives, from a lot of different people who want to take things from you, governments, tax authorities. So that's why a trust is sort of the buzzword in this industry. For high net worth individuals, you want to set yourself up with a trust. But the Panama Foundation is really a structure that in a lot of ways mimics, it's very similar to a trust, but it provides the advantage that you maintain full control of the assets of the entities inside the foundation. Whereas when you give stuff up to a trust, those assets become controlled by the trust. And it might seem like a very small distinction, but it's very, very important. Especially like if you're going to run a business, something like that. In a lot of ways, it makes a lot more sense to put it inside the foundation than inside of a trust. And so a couple examples I can give you. We had a client from Canada who set up a Panamanian foundation, and he basically has businesses, properties scattered all over the world. And we were able to put the individual structures inside the foundation and really shield all of those businesses from any personal liability, from any claims from the individual. And at the same time, just like with a trust, he's able to establish the future beneficiaries. So if something happens to him, he passes, everything inside this foundation will be given to his wife, to his children. So it's really setting himself up to be bulletproof, so to speak, while he's living, but then also setting up what happens when I die, what's going to happen to all my assets. And really, we've had really good success with putting people, setting them up with these foundations. Another use example, not with a foundation, but with a Panama business. More and more, we have a lot of people, whether it's Bitcoin, whether they're crypto traders, and they want to put those gains, they want to put those assets inside a structure. And you can put it inside a foundation, you can put it inside a trust, but in a lot of cases, it makes sense to set up a crypto trading company. That way you get the crypto, you get the Bitcoin out of your name, you're putting it in the name of a company, and you're actually able to trade your assets using that company, which of course helps you from a personal liability side, but also from like a KYC compliance, taxation, because it's not you personally who's subject to the taxation. It's the company in most cases. And like a crypto company that we set up in Panama has no tax liability in Panama for any of those gains.
Okay. Now that we're moving to the segment to speak about residency process, because the last segment we're going to be speaking about the foundations in detail. But right now, let's go to the beginner baby steps, which is I want to start doing business in Panama, or I want to start just living in Panama. So how can I start having my residency in Panama? How long it takes? What are the requirements? And what documents do you need from me to start doing my residency?
Okay, great question. So Panama makes it pretty easy, and there's a lot of confusion and a lot of misinformation out there about what is required. So a few years ago, 10 years ago or so, Panama established something called the Friendly Nations Visa. And originally you had to put $5,000 in a bank, and then you would receive immediate permanent residency. Back when I got my residency in Panama, that's how it worked. It was ridiculously easy. But like all good things, that came to an end. And so they changed. They did not eliminate. They just sort of changed the requirements for the Friendly Nation Visa. And the common misconception that people have is that today in investment, you have to buy real estate, that it's actually quite expensive to take advantage of this program. And I'm here to tell you that's 100% false. It's not true. Basically, the Friendly Nation Visa still exists. It still applies to most of the countries that people who are listening to this podcast are from. Your European countries, US, Australia, many of the Latin American countries, all fall within this Friendly Nations Visa. And yes, you can now qualify through an investment, through a real estate purchase, but you can also qualify through company formation. And for most people, this is going to be the path that makes the most sense. It's the most affordable to set up. How it works in a nutshell is we form a company on your behalf, and the company then requests permission. They request the visa for you. So by forming this simple company, you request the visa. It's no longer permanent. That's the other big non-positive change in this. You have to do a 2-year temporary residence, but it's very easy to convert the residency to permanent after 2 years. What documents are required? Panama really only requires one thing, which is a apostilled criminal cert. No birth certificate. Again, you're not going to have to show proof of funds, anything like that. The process is we form the company before you come to Panama. To form the company, it can be done in a week, 10 days. Typically takes about 2-3 weeks if you don't want to rush everything through, at which point you'll have to come to Panama. We recommend, again, you come for 3-4 days, business days, with your apostilled criminal cert. We take you through to a few appointments during that time. Your company's already been formed. You'll leave after those 3-4 days as a temporary resident with a temporary cedula that's valid for 6 months. But that gives you, at that point, full rights to live in Panama.
So let me understand. So what you're saying is that the business formation, it's already done before I'm going to Panama. So I enter with my passport to Panama.
Correct. Okay. So you would end up, we could in theory form the business while you were there, but then you'd have to stay in Panama for longer. Mm-hmm. So for most people, they will come with the business already formed, their passport in hand, of course, to enter a foreign country, this apostilled criminal cert, and they will go to a few appointments with our attorney. We have an office set up in Panama. And then after 6 months, they will need to return to Panama if they haven't stayed. So a second trip is required in Panama, and you will get your cedula that is valid for the remaining year and a half. So that takes you to the 2-year mark. At which point you would apply for the permanent residency.
So for summarize that information, I'm going to Panama the next week. I love this podcast. I want to buy this service. And how many days you can finish my business formation?
So typically I recommend giving us about 2 to 3 weeks to form the business. And then once it's formed, you'll need to come to Panama at your convenience for 3 or 4 business days.
And that visa is what allows me to enter to Panama with the friendly nation visa, right?
No, so basically Panama is going to be visa free to any of those friendly nations that I'm speaking about. US, European, most Latin American countries. They don't require a visa to enter as a tourist. So you'll actually enter as a tourist into Panama. And then once you're in Panama, we will apply for this residency for you based on the friendly nations.
Okay, but it has to be done through a business entity.
It has to be done through a business entity. It can, as I mentioned, be done through an investment or through purchasing real estate. But for 99% of our clients, what makes the most sense and is the fastest process is through the business. It's much more cost effective. And the other thing to keep in mind, I always tell people, even if your plan is to invest or to buy real estate, if you're not already in Panama, it doesn't make sense to say, hey, I'm going to move to this country without ever having lived there, and I'm going to buy property. Back up, slow down, do it through business formation. It's much more cost effective. And then once you're in the country, once you're actually living there, spend time so you're not pressured and find the right investment, find the right property. And you can still do that. You can still invest. You can still buy real estate. It's just not required for the residency.
I must admit that I have met this sort of clients that really wants to invest through an investment visa. In this sort of field, I have met different clients saying, I just want to pay $250,000, $500K and just do it on that way. And it's funny because when we explain, or I had the opportunity to explain in the Spanish language, they say, but why I want to do it in the cheapest way? I want the most expensive one. But at the same time, what we explain is like, you don't know what you will find out there. Maybe it's not the right place for you. Maybe geographically it's not the right place right now. But the idea is that we help you to think the things slowly. That's why we are here.
And what I always point out to people is, take your time, because even if, yes, you're right, you want to end up buying a real estate investment or whatever the project is, if you're not pressured to find something immediately so you can qualify for a residency, if you take 6 months, you take a year to find the right property, the odds are you're going to make a better decision, a better investment for the long term.
Under pressure nothing is good.
Nothing ever.
No.
Exactly.
Now, Jerz, let's go to the other part of business formations. Can someone make like an invoice to charge their clients and receive their payment through offshore banking there? How you can typically suggest those processes?
You can. We work with a bank that has pretty cost-effective payment processing, similar to what you'd expect to pay through a platform like Stripe or whatnot. That said, in many cases, it still makes more sense, depending on what the business is, to conduct it through a US LLC. So for a lot of clients, we set up different structures in different jurisdictions for different use cases. And a lot of times that means having both a Panama company and a US LLC. even with this payment processor I'm speaking about that's offshore, it's just not as user-friendly. The platform's not going to be as good as something like Stripe or the popular payment processors in the US. So for somebody that really doesn't want their personal ownership, say, of a US LLC, a structure we commonly create is a Panamanian limited company that will directly own the US LLC. But then you can still access Stripe, PayPal, US banking through that LLC, which the Panama Corporation owns.
You mentioned that we can get the residency through creating a business formation. But let's say that the person who wants to create the business for getting the residency, they actually wants to do business. Is there any restriction of businesses to do there?
Yes and no. As I mentioned, Panama's pretty friendly in the crypto space. So usually we don't have those businesses, don't have problems getting approved. I have seen certain businesses that are, say, drug related, anything, with marijuana, even if it's legal in the specific jurisdiction, Panama doesn't really want to touch that. Anything related to like pornography, OnlyFans, stuff like that, Panama's probably not the best jurisdiction for that either. But in general, Panama's very open to most legal forms of businesses and legal business activity.
Do you need like a physical office or a staff in Panama? When you create a business, you might become like a director in the business, correct? But do you need any other requirements to keep active that business?
Yes. So business in Panama requires 3 directors. And usually the client is going to serve as one of those directors. And the other directors are going to be nominees. So you can nominate somebody yourself. You can put your spouse, a friend, business partner. They can be on the company with you, but in probably 95% of the cases, we use our lawyers, and the lawyers serve as the other directors. The cool thing in Panama is those directors don't have any power, so you don't have to worry they're going to steal your company, steal your money. They can't do anything. It's basically, it's similar. Most people are familiar with like registered agents in the US. Okay. Think of a director as like a registered agent. They just sort of appear on the company documents. It's important to have them in case there's a legal notice from a person, from a government that needs to be given to the business. But as far as what they can do, they have no power. They can't do anything.
But do we also need to mention that we can also add like a spouse or...
We can absolutely add a spouse, but as I said, most people choose to use these nominated directors when they form the company.
Okay. So it's also good to mention that, to keep in mind about those directors in order to also approve the business formation and the visa, correct? Or doesn't have to do anything?
Well, the directors are just something that will appear on it. So like we offer packages to form your business in Panama, both independently and as part of the residency process. And in those packages, we typically include the directors for you, since most of you are going to want to use our lawyers for their directors. Same thing, you mentioned the registered office. That's typically included in our package for business formation. The other thing to keep in mind, people often ask, okay, because it's a business. All businesses have annual like upkeep. You have to do things to keep the business active. And that is an important consideration because there is a small cost. Basically, the business every year, you're going to have to renew the business. You're going to have to file a tax return for the business. Even though in most cases the business is not going to owe any tax, the return still has to be filed. You're going to need to keep using the directors, and you're going to need an address, like a registered address. So we usually offer a package for the formation and then a package for the renewal every year, which includes all of those things. You don't have to think about it. You don't have to worry, you're going to get a bill in the mail for a recurring fee or government tax, city tax. We include all of that in our packages.
Awesome. That's a great point to mention, that you have those bundles packages in your services, because there's people that actually says, no, I just want the residency or the tax residency, and that's it. And others want maybe the business formation, and others says, hey, I want just the business formation and see in the future if I can take benefit of the residency, no?
Exactly. So we get people who just do the business. We get people who do both. I'll mention one other thing, which is sort of a unique product that we offer. In fact, I don't think anybody else out there offers this product.
What is it?
So for those people who say, I just want the lowest cost residency. I don't want a business. I don't want that yearly upkeep. What can I do to still take advantage of the friendly nation's visa? And the answer is, we can basically put you on one of our businesses. What that means is we can, in a sense, rent you one of our companies. So you don't have to create your own company. And we can use that company that we already have to get you the friendly nation's visa. Now, it's not like a substantial difference in price. It's not, but because most of the cost in the package is not the business formation, it's the residency. So it's a little bit cheaper. And then you don't have to worry about sort of the annual upkeep and whatnot for the business.
Now, let's go to the other segment, which is what Jerz has been speaking about from early this podcast, are the Panama Foundation. It's something that nobody is speaking about now.
Yeah, it's a product you really don't hear much about. I think a lot of that is intentional. The way Panama structured it, they don't want a ton of people using this product. So it's nice. It keeps it pretty exclusive. You go on the internet, you go on the social platforms, everybody's talking about Nevis Trust. Everybody's talking about Cook Islands Trust. Panama Foundations, not so much.
It sounds very mysterious, but let's go now to speak about that, because you're mentioning now Cayman Islands, you're speaking about this small island, very popular for citizenship and trust funds. But also these offshore structures give you like a sauce that is not very that clear. What makes Panama that different from them?
Between the foundation and the trust?
Yes.
So the biggest difference is the control. One of the disadvantages of trusts is that you lose control of the ability to manage what's inside the trust, because the trust becomes the owner as such of everything that's inside of it. So practically, what does that mean? Something like a business works much better inside the Panamanian Foundation because you retain full control as the individual, even though from a liability, from an asset protection perspective, the foundation serves the same purpose as the trust. But the foundation has the added benefit of giving you the control. So you still as a private person maintain control over everything that's inside the foundation, which is a really important distinction.
And what you can keep in that place, because what I know from that is when a state can have possession of that information in this global world, can get access to certain compliance. How also is that private? So the cool thing about a Panamanian foundation is it's possible to structure it where you have directors, you have other people besides yourself who are going to appear as the managers, the directors of this foundation. So as far as public records go, your name doesn't necessarily have to appear on anything. There's a deed for the foundation that your name will appear on, but that's a private document that you keep
that shows the world, should you present it, you own it, but it's not filed anywhere. So publicly, if an ex-wife, if a government, even a tax authority goes in and looks at the foundation, it's very, very difficult to impossible for them to determine the actual beneficial owner, who that is. The other big benefit, I would say, of a foundation is with the banking. Because of that sort of control aspect that I mentioned, it's actually easier to set up banking for the foundation than it is for the trusts. So we have good contacts in Switzerland, in Singapore, where you can really get solid banking in the name of the foundation. Now, the thing to keep in mind is when you bring banking in, even though the governments aren't necessarily going to be able to see the beneficial owner in public information, if you have a bank account tied to it, the bank is going to need to know who that beneficial information is. So you are sort of creating a chain which can, in essence, penetrate the shield, the privacy protection of the foundation. But again, what I usually recommend is, hey, don't use these structures to hide money. Use them to legally protect and create a structure, both for you personally and for your foundation, which is all of your stuff, that legally, without hiding anything, allows you to achieve this lower tax rate or zero tax.
Right. It's because what I notice is that most of governments make us feel like gangsters for figuring it out earlier about investments, our great business, a great idea to solve many issues in the world. And that's the problem right now that we're having, that we don't feel understood by other nations. Technically, all the people right now are feeling insecure. Their banking is also get frozen because they make a good trade that they read on X or Twitter or Instagram. And actually, maybe they got lucky and they got a couple $100s. And nowadays people say, okay, what if I make up to 1 million? What if I make 10 million? And nowadays expectation of life, which is now superior than before, people are saying, well, if governments are frozen my funds, how I do that? How is my security? What is my private life is going on? So it's good to ask those questions.
Absolutely. And one of the big reasons people look at putting their stuff inside of a trust, inside a foundation, is protection from those things, because it's much more difficult for a bank, for a government, for anybody to take your stuff away when it's inside one of these structures.
Let's speak about now banking in Panama. For those that knows a lot about Jerz, he has been speaking a lot about Panama and other structures. But right now, everybody can open a bank account in Panama. How is that structure works?
We're able to open up at a couple different banks inside Panama accounts remotely. And you don't have to be a resident. You don't have to visit Panama. You don't have to have any association with Panama to be able to open these accounts. One that's in particular, we've opened a lot of these accounts for our clients, is crypto friendly, which is a unique product. It's an account that allows you to directly send USDT, USDC to the account, and then send out in those stable coins as well. The KYC, the compliance exists to open up the account, but it's minimal. So it makes it very attractive, especially for like the global sovereign individual. The cool thing, if you have one of these tax residencies set up, we use this account a lot with our Paraguay clients, because the KYC is all based on the information of your tax residency. So any information that's getting shared by the bank is based on your tax residency. So if you're a French citizen and you've gotten a Paraguay or a Panamanian tax residency and you open up this account with us remotely, the information sharing will not be with France. It'll be with Panama or Paraguay, which, as you can imagine, has a lot of advantages. Again, not encouraging you to hide money, but if you're doing it legally, if you've properly left the French system, you've established this tax residency, there's nothing wrong with that information going to Panama or Paraguay and not to France.
It's true. It's not even for that. It's even for remote workers. Would you like me to share a little bit more about my personal
Absolutely.
story? So when I met Jerz, one of the problems I was having, I was a remote worker for a U.S. company, and I was actually working for a private entity. I'm unable to say their name. And basically, my banks closed all my banks, and I was just an employee from a business entity that I was unable to show them their name. Always was just the contract of disclosure, the confidentiality. And I was unable to use for years a bank account. When I spoke with Jerz about this situation, he told me, hey, this in Panama doesn't have any problem with your passport. It doesn't have any problem with the sort of business structure that you're working with because you're not doing anything illegal. You're just doing consultation for a Bitcoin company, for example. And in that aspect, there are many workers around the world that I'm pretty sure they're living that circumstance. And I was just receiving $3,000 at that time. So it's nothing. It's nothing at this point. And with different small contracts I was having, it was $1,500 or $500, all shut down. I didn't have any possibility. And here you have the king of offshore structures.
Yeah. So this account we opened for Gaby is the account I'm talking about. It's a crypto-friendly account. It can be opened remotely. We have packages available to set up this account individually. The other nice thing, we offer packages that combine the banking with the residency, and we can customize them to your individual needs. Another thing that I will mention for a lot of these people, for a lot of you who are doing these tax residency setups in Panama, in Paraguay, the sort of best combo that you can do when you have this remote work, when you have consulting work, when you have an online business, set up a U.S. LLC with U.S. business banking, set up this crypto-friendly Panamanian bank I'm talking about on a personal level. And then when you get paid by your employer as a contractor, you get paid into the U.S. LLC. The money flows to your business account in the U.S. Again, we can set this up for you. And then when you actually want to spend the money, withdraw the money from the U.S. business account to this Panamanian personal account. It has debit card. It has this, you can pay with your cell phones, the Apple Pay, the Google Pay, stuff like that. And that is what gives you in the end the zero tax setup. Flowing the money sort of in this circle. So just to summarize, you're combining a territorial tax residency with a U.S. LLC, a U.S. business account, and a Panamanian personal account.
That was the next topic.
I'm always ahead.
I love that. I love that because this is why I enjoy doing this with you. So that's exactly what I wanted to ask you. What are the best structures to mix and combine with Panama? Because with this global strategy, people will say, oh, I will stop there because they said I'm comfortable with that. But what's the next step? What would be the perfect setup for clients once they get that?
For the majority of clients, I would say probably 80% of the people we work with, that combination that I just mentioned, the Panama residency, a U.S. LLC, a U.S. business bank account, and a Panamanian personal account is all you're going to need. It's a pretty bulletproof setup. It's relatively low cost to set up, to maintain. So for people, until you get to a certain level, that's really all you need. Then for our super high net worth individuals, people who sort of get to that next level, and I would put that next level at somebody who's making more than 500,000 per year, has a net worth 3 to 5 million. That's sort of the minimal base level where I say, okay, you need to start looking at a more complex structure. That's the level where, hey, it might make sense to explore a foundation or a trust, something like that. But until you get to that level, in almost every case, unless you have very specific like business needs or something like that, the setup that we're going to recommend that will most likely be the most cost effective, provide the best protection for you, is going to be something like a Panamanian residency, US LLC, U.S. business bank, and a Panama personal bank.
I believe that you have a lot of expertise to help high net worth individuals, situations that are very current on the social media or the press news, that they are saying their tax structures in Cyprus or Malta is no longer their option. Dubai right now is humid. They don't want to be living there because it's not their reality. And what they said is like, I have never been in the Americas to start exploring. And I try to think, well, why they don't meet Jerz? Why they don't make like an hour consultation with Jerz?
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing that I always mention, especially to the high net worth people, it really pays for itself tenfold. Set up a consultation call with me. What we do in those calls is really understand your existing structure. We want to know first where you're at and what you're doing. And then we want to know where you want to get to. What are your goals? And then we sort of build that bridge between where you're at now and where you want to go. And I think that's the part that a lot of people miss. It's like, okay, I'm here and I want to go here. And so a lot of companies in this space, I think they sort of have these canned solutions, especially for high net worth individuals. And you can't have these sort of canned solutions. You have to really understand what the client wants, where he's at and where he wants to go. And the key is to be able to build that bridge between those two spaces. And that's really what I specialize in.
For the final thoughts of this podcast, I would love to ask you more like an intimate question about individuals, because we are not only treating clients, you're treating humans with fears. That's what makes us unique as a species, to the emotions. And I noticed that you can release the fear to many people. You give them calm. You give them also the peace of mind. They don't have that fear. What you can tell them to those individuals that are going through difficult situations with bank accounts that are already frozen, they're divorced, and they want to start with this, what you can tell them with that fear, and why do you think they have that fear in their mindset? Maybe it's a survival mode, or what?
Well, I think it's what I was just talking about. The problem is people know where they're at, and in a lot of cases, where they're at's not a good situation. So, like you mentioned, I just got divorced. I just lost my job. My bank froze my accounts, whatever that situation is. And then they say, this is where I want to be. I want to be this sovereign individual like you, Jerz, who pays minimal amount of taxes, who has bank accounts all over the world, who doesn't have to go to a 9-to-5 job. That is where I want to be. And most people just look at those two spots, the current and the desired, and it's just the space between them is too great. And so what I have a lot of success with people is, once I understand those two spaces, I can work with them to build that bridge step by step. And I think that creates a lot of confidence. It alleviates a lot of those fears you mentioned, because we're actually creating a process. It's like, how do I go from A to Z? that's complicated because, you're skipping everything in between. But if we say, okay, from here, we take this baby step to get you here. So we do this, here's the timeline. Then once we've done this, we get you to here. Here's the timeline. And I think that's something people can relate to, and they can understand that it's possible to get between those points by following this plan. And that's what we do. We create the plan for you.
And it's a kind of mindset, because Jerz could do all of that. But if you're afraid of doing that step and you are feeling comfortable in a high tax country, there's no point that Jerz also help you, but at the same time, you don't go out. You also make the effort to also change that mentality, because it's also part of the surviving mode that you have been for so many years. And that cultural shock also, that mentality is a mindset shock, and you have to be prepared for that.
It is. And it's, you've got to have the mind open enough to want to make the change. I rarely, but every now and then I'll get a client, he'll have a consultation. He's like, Jerz, I want to pay tax. I like paying my tax. I want to know how I can pay more tax. Believe me, I've actually had somebody who said that to me. And okay, I can help you with that too. But it's really understanding. And like for that person who I'm speaking about, in that case, okay, it doesn't make sense for you to consider setting up a residency in a low tax jurisdiction. In this case, this was an individual, he was Argentinian. And we explored options in Europe and Canada that gave him what he wanted. He wanted to live in a high tax country that had social services, and that's a possibility. I'm not saying there's one solution for everybody. I'm saying, where are you at? Where do you want to go? And how to get there. And I can and I will help you regardless of where that goalpost is, where you want to be. But it's understanding that.
I read the final thoughts, but also read something very interesting. People are fearing money. Do you think it's true?
I do. I think people have seen so much change. What's happened over the last number of years, prices have gone up everywhere. People don't have enough money. They've seen or at least heard stories about bank accounts getting closed, getting shut off from your own money. So I think there is a lot of fear, both around the whole concept of money, but just on how I'm going to make it, how I'm going to survive in this world that seems to be changing by magnitudes every time we turn around.
It's true, but it's also on purpose, no?
Of course. I mean, I think it's all part of some plan. I'm not saying we know what that plan is, but it's definitely there's a purposeful element to everything that's happening.
Exactly. Final thoughts about that. What do you think?
Well, I think the best thing anybody can do, regardless of what your beliefs, give yourself options. So, I think even if you're relatively happy where you are, it makes sense to explore, well, what happens if things change? Set up a plan B, set up a plan C, because once you really need to make a change, it's usually too late. So I encourage people to start now. Now is the best time to start.
That's true. Well, guys, thank you so much for watching this episode. The next week, we're going to be having more things to speak about. And also, if you have more questions to Jerz, remember that you can always send us a message and we're going to be more than happy to assist you. And also that we're doing live sessions on Instagram.
Yes. So you can send us DMs on most of the social platforms, The Jerz Way. Jerz at thejerzway.com is my email, The Jerz Way website. We just launched our new website. Still a few bugs in it, but we'll get rid of those in the next few days. So check those out. We answer every question we get. So we're happy to answer quick questions for you. And yes, we started doing some live streams. So look out for those. We do a lot of cool promotions on those live streams. And
When is it?
we do it Wednesdays at like 11 a.m., I think.
Or
Yeah.
you're
We're-
going to be.
We'll be announcing the time. So be sure to subscribe on Instagram, and we'll notify everybody of the exact time once it's scheduled.
And also in your group chat on Instagram, it's called The Sovereign Individuals. Is where also he shares more insights about his personal life or belief system, and is more private for this tribe of sovereign individuals who wants a new chapter in their lives.
Perfect.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gabby, and we will see y'all next week.
Thank you. Bye bye, guys.